Okay, so welcome back everybody. This is chapter 10, which deals with helping behaviors, often referred to as pro-social behaviors. Um, so let's get into it. So when we take a look at chapter 10, your book starts off with talking about the evolutionary or biological basis of behaviors. So when we talk about, say, evolutionary factors in helping, we see that from an evolutionary perspective, we could ask the question, what is the function of helping other people, right? Isn't it within our best interest to help ourselves? Isn't the whole point to do things that are going to help us survive, to help us live long enough to pass on our genes. But we see often times we help people who are not only related to us, people who share a proportion of our genes, but we often help complete strangers. So what could possibly be the evolutionary benefit in doing that? Well, we could start with this idea of the selfish gene. Right, and this is the notion that from an evolutionary perspective, it's not about the survival of the fittest individual. We often hear that term, survival of the fittest. It has no place in evolutionary theory. It has a place in social evolution. Basically, fascism or Nazism, essentially. But from an evolutionary perspective, the emphasis of survival is not on the individual, it's on the genetic level. The notion of the selfish gene is that your genes are going to do, your body is essentially a vessel for your genes to keep on going, to keep doing what's going to be best for them, essentially, right? And this leads to the idea or the notion of kin selection. In kin selection, says that we will rather help, or we're going to show a preference to helping individuals who are more genetically related to us, say, rather than individuals who are less genetically related to us. Why? Well, because our genes want to survive, and this person who's more genetically related to you has more genetic information, have more genes in common with you. So even if it's not helping you survive, it's not about you, right? Your genes know that this person is related to you, that you have say if it's a close relative, a high proportion of genes in common, rather. So your genes are going to help this person because your genes are helping themselves to survive in this sense. And the notion of kin selection is something that we see quite often. It's pretty well documented in the research. In this study here, this was done by Fitzgerald, 2009, and they asked people to imagine certain situations, either a low risk situation, a medium risk, or a high risk situation, and how likely they would be to help either a friend, a half sibling, or a sibling. So siblings, we share 50% of our genetic material with, our DNA with. Half siblings, that would be 25%. And we would assume a friend we would have 0% for all intents and purposes, right? I mean, we're all human, we're all related genetically somehow, but for all intents and purposes. So in low risk situations, there doesn't seem to be this kin selection effect happening. People seem to be equally likely to help a friend, a half sibling, or a full sibling when it came to low risk situations. However, we start seeing this kin selection phenomenon kick in when it comes to medium risk situations. So situations that are pose more of a threat to you, either physically or a social threat. We'll talk about that in a moment here. But medium risk situations, we see that people are more likely to help a full sibling, someone who they share more of the same genes with. Second in line would be a half sibling, and then a friend. Kin selection theory is kind of at play here. This is evidence, at least when it comes to medium risk situation. And we see the same pattern emerge when it comes to high risk situations, right? It's interesting how there's less of a difference when it comes to, say, the friend and the half sibling when it comes to the high risk situation. There is a clear advantage for a full sibling, but then this is where we have to put on our social psychologist hats or our psychologist hats, right? You get to choose your friends. You don't get to choose your family, right? Well, you could have your chosen family, but these are not necessarily people who share a whole lot of DNA or genetic information with you, right? So maybe when it comes to these high-risk situations, there's a clear kin selection for people who are your full siblings, but maybe some social factors are coming into play. Say, your friend is someone who you choose to be with, choose to be friends with, and maybe that's starting to take precedent over, say, someone who is your half sibling, essentially. Either way, this is just one of lots of examples where this kin selection theory is being supported by the research. Okay, so what about people who we don't have any DNA in common with, people who we are not genetically related to? But why do we help them, right? Well, there's this notion called reciprocal altruism, and when we talk about reciprocal altruism, this is altruism that involves an individual helping another person despite some immediate cost or risk that that they might be facing, and being more likely to receive help from the other in return, right? So, in other words, we help people because we expect to be helped in return from that person, right? This would be straight up reciprocal altruism. You scratch my back, I scratch your back, right? I don't need to be related to you. In order for me to help you, I just have to know that if I help you now, when I need help, you're going to be there to help me. But we also help people that we don't even know directly, whether they're related to us or not. We just might not even know them, might not even consider them friends or acquaintances. We have no idea. Excuse me. So sometimes we help people who would never be able to repay that favor back to us. So this is where that notion of indirect reciprocity comes into play. So when we talk about indirect reciprocity, this is a kind of reciprocal altruism in which an individual is going to help someone because we expect or we think it'll be likely that someone else is going to help us, right? So we don't need this person who we help to help us directly back. Instead, if I help this person, then someone else is going to help me. And it's almost as if we're building this type of social norm, right? We could think of it kind of as a social norm. We have the social norm of reciprocity. Direct reciprocity, well, I help you or I give you food when you're hungry because I expect you to give me food when I'm hungry. That's easy to explain from an evolutionary perspective. But why give why give food to someone who's hungry who you're never going to see again? Well, according to indirect reciprocity, you'll do that because someone else will give you food when you're hungry, right? So you help this person, but someone else will help you. So we can make this distinction between, say, direct reciprocity or indirect reciprocity when it comes to altruism. So how exactly does altruism work? How did empathy evolve, let's say? Well, I guess we should first think about what empathy is. So when we talk about empathy, this is an understanding or vicariously experiencing another person's perspective and feeling sympathy or compassion for that individual. We'll see that empathy involves a cognitive component that we call perspective taking. So in order to feel empathy for somebody, you need to be able to put yourself into their shoes, essentially, right? You have to be able to understand what they're going through, or actually experience vicariously what they're going through. Empathy also involves what's known as empathic concern. So empathic concern is the emotional component that comes with empathy. Perspective taking is the cognitive component, and then empathic concern is that emotional component. And it's this emotional component that involves other-oriented feelings. What do we mean by other-oriented feelings? Well, you can not only put yourself in someone else's shoes, not only take their perspective, but you could also feel their pain, so to speak, right? Empathic concern is when someone you care about is upset, and that makes you upset, right? Like you can actually feel their pain. So when we talk about empathy, we can think about it as involving these two components, an emotional component and this cognitive component. And there's actually a lot of evidence to suggest that empathy is not solely a human trait, that there's lots of evidence to suggest that empathy can exist in other species as well. Any of you who have, well, especially dogs, cats, are a little bit more difficult to figure out. But dogs, certainly, when you're upset, if you're a dog owner or lover, you kind of know that they know that you're upset and are concerned for you, right? So I'm sure you have personal evidence of that, but there's plenty of research to suggest that as well. Okay, so when it comes to say helping people can oftentimes be very rewarding. Typically speaking, people like to be helpful. People like to help out. It typically feels good for us to help out. So in that sense, we can speak of the rewards of helping, right? And when we talk about rewards, they can be psychological rewards, or they could be material rewards. We might actually get something physical, material in return, or helping can be rewarding in psychological or emotional types of ways. And when we talk about, say, the potential rewards of helping, some of the good things that come from helping, they can often be offset by costs, right? So not all helping is going to be rewarding, or even if it is rewarding, if helping is rewarding, there might be some benefits to helping, along with some costs or risks associated with helping as well. And we'll talk about in a minute here about how those things kind of interact or how they play off one another to determine whether or not we're going to engage in a helping behavior, right? So when we talk about altruistic behavior that genuinely helps other people, we'll make a distinction between altruistic and egotistic helping behavior in a moment here. But this altruistic behavior, this selfless behavior, the helping for the sake of helping, tends to activate areas in the brain that are associated with receiving material rewards. So even if we're not getting anything in return, physically in return, these types of altruistic helping behaviors kind of are rewarding in themselves. They activate the parts of the brain, they're releasing the dopamine. Our brains don't really distinguish between, our brains can, how can I put this? They can kind of be tricked, so to speak, into thinking that we are receiving some type of material gain or some type of material reward, even if we're not, right? We also have a phenomenon known as the negative state relief model that we'll talk about more in a moment here. And this model basically says that helping makes us feel good, right? And it can relieve a negative emotional or cognitive state that we're in, right? So this is why we'll see in a moment when people are upset, they're more likely to help. Put an asterisk next to that. Kind of depends. Could go both ways. But when we're feeling bad about ourselves, let's say, so if we have some negative self-esteem, volunteering somewhere might make us feel good about ourselves. Also, when it comes to grief or loss, we'll often see people who, after the death of a loved one or even after retirement, lost the job, let's say, grief and loss can come in many different ways. People will often volunteer or help in other types of ways as an attempt to make themselves feel better. Right? And we'll see some of the research that goes both ways. But when it comes to personal spending, holidays are coming up here, and we take a look at what gives people more satisfaction, spending money on themselves or spending money on other people. And research consistently shows that we actually tend to prefer, or we get more joy, more happiness out of spending money on other people, giving money to a good cause, or giving, a really nice gift, spending a lot of money on someone who we care about, feels better to us than spending money on ourselves. Of course, this is on average, right? And if we take a look at the differences here in terms of the rating scale, 8.5 versus a little over 9.5. It's a significant difference if we're talking about a 10-point rating scale. That's almost 10% more, right? So it's an important finding, right? Is that we tend to want to help people. We're almost programmed to do so from genetic or evolutionary perspective, particularly when it comes to people who we care about, or if we're spending money towards issues that we care about. These types of pro-social spending. Okay, so helping is not always all about rewards, right? Being helpful can often have costs associated with it. And when we talk about costs, those could be actual physical costs. Excuse me. Okay, I'm back. Sorry there. Still getting over something. So I might need to pause every so often here. But as I was saying, helping often has costs associated with it. And those costs are not only physical costs, that you could cause injury to yourself, but also psychological costs or social, societal types of costs. And there's this notion called courageous resistance, and this refers to when we provide, or when people provide sustained and deliberate help in the face of potentially enormous costs. And there are plenty of professions out there that people make a living by helping, and helping under some really difficult situations, right? So when we talk about physical costs and mental costs, it could also be financial costs of providing this long-term care, especially if we're talking about, say, for a very ill person, a loved one, right? Think about someone who is providing help to a very ill parent or loved one. This could have extreme emotional and physical, financial costs associated with it. As I was saying before, certain professions, the helping professions, particularly social workers, nurses, doctors, EMT workers, firefighters, so on and so forth, there's a lot of psychological and physical costs associated with these jobs, and they're often pretty low paying jobs. Maybe not doctors, right? But certainly when it comes to say firefighters, EMT workers, and social workers, I would say that these people probably display a lot of courageous resistance. How long can that go on for, right? These tends to be fields where there's a lot of burnout, there's high turnover rates. There's a lot of costs associated with helping sometimes. So when people, need to decide whether they're going to intervene and they're going to help or not, most people are going to do a cost-benefit analysis before they decide whether they're going to help. So essentially, what the research suggests, what the chapter suggests, is that we're going to weigh the costs and benefits of intervening or not before we decide to intervene. And there are some laws that exist that try to help lessen the costs for us. The Good Samaritan laws are an example of that. Good Samaritan laws help to lessen any potential costs. For example, you might be driving down the highway and notice that there's a pretty bad car accident, but you might be hesitant to get involved because what happens if you move a person and you break their back or sever their spinal cord in the process, and you're now liable, right? That this person would be able to sue you for making them paralyzed. You didn't really make them paralyzed. They had a horrible injury, but you did move them. So maybe if you didn't move them, then they wouldn't have been paralyzed, and you're less liable, right? And those lawsuits have happened. Good Samaritan laws are in place to prevent those types of liability lawsuits from happening. Is that if you unintentionally injure somebody in the process of trying to help them or save their lives, which I would say is helping, right? These laws prevent them from suing you. There are also duty to rescue laws that try to promote pro-social behavior by basically saying that if you have an opportunity to help someone and it does not put you in any type of physical or in any extreme danger or risk, then you have an obligation, you have a duty to help them. And if you don't, then, they can sue you. So morality aside, or taking whether or not these laws are good or not aside, they exist as ways to try to either encourage people to help, or to at least, well, both of them, or trying to encourage people to help. One of them is basically kind of threatening you that, you better help, you have a duty to. The other one saying, no, it's okay to help. We're going to lessen any potential cost, or take away any potential financial cost, at least through the Good Samaritan laws. Okay, so when we talk about helping, if there are costs and benefits associated with them, then how can we ever be sure that somebody is helping for altruistic reasons or for egotistical reasons, right? When we talk about egotism, or say egotistic reasons why someone might help, these are reasons where someone is motivated by the desire to improve their own welfare. So they might help because of the rewards that come along with helping. People who are helping for altruistic reasons would be motivated by the desire to improve someone else's welfare. Essentially, they're motivated by the desire to actually help, not to experience any type of rewards that come along with helping. The question, though, is, can helping ever really be completely altruistic? Could it ever really be completely altruistic if we experience benefits from it? If helping feels good, then isn't helping always at least a little egotistic, right? Or if we help because we don't want to feel bad, right? It's like, oh, okay, let me help this person, because if I don't, I'm going to feel like a shitty person. Well, is that not an egotistic reason for helping, right? And your book goes into this debate a lot, and psychologists, academics can debate anything ad nauseum. But for me personally, I'm not sure it really matters, right? If in the end people are helping other people, does it matter if you gave money to feed someone because you wanted to feel better about yourself, or you gave money to feed someone because you didn't want them to be hungry anymore? In the end, did you not feed somebody, right? It's like, these are important questions. I'm not denying that. They're interesting questions, but I don't know, sometimes it borders a little too much on philosophy or morality, at least for my taste, right? And certainly psychologists who study morality and moral development, absolutely legitimate field. Same for me, and from a social psychological perspective, I think in the end the person is getting help, right? But when we take a look at something like Bateson's model of this empathy altruism hypothesis, this is the proposition that empathic concern for a person is needed to produce an altruistic motive for helping. So what do we mean by this statement? Well, that in order for something to be truly altruistic, the focus has to be on the other person, not on how you would feel in that situation, right? Once you start thinking about, oh, how horrible it must be, for this person, because I can imagine how horrible I would feel in that situation, let me help them. Well, now you're helping for egotistic reasons. But if you just say how horrible it is for that person, I want to help them. I want to help them not feel that way. Then this would be helping for altruistic type of reasons. Like I said, I don't want to start getting into a whole discussion about this, but it is, an interesting question. I think it's more of a philosophical question. For me, especially someone who is much more of an applied researcher or an applied psychologist, I don't give a shit why you're helping someone, so long as you're helping them, right? I don't care why you gave them food. It's to feel better about yourself or because you felt bad for them. In the end, for me, is that what matters is that they got food, right? But when it comes to this, say, this different model, or how we can try to understand altruistic or egotistic behaviors or motives, we can think of it or break down Batesman's proposition here. I think this graph kind of does a good job at doing that. Right? We start off by having this perceiving that somebody needs our help. So we see that someone needs our help. And the first step would be whether or not we can take that other person's perspective. Whether whether this perspective takes place. If it does take place, if we put ourselves into the other person's shoes, right? We can imagine ourselves in their position, or we can, see ourselves in that position. Then the likely emotional response is going to be empathic concern. We're going to feel bad for this person, essentially, right? And then the type of motive, let's say if we do help, this is all assuming that there's a helping behavior involved here, then the type of motive would be altruistic in nature. So we're helping this person because we want to reduce their pain. We want to reduce their suffering. And the satisfaction of the motive would be a reduction in that other person's pain, in that other person's distress, right? So this is one path. If we take on this other person's perspective, we're likely to feel empathic concern. This is going to motivate us to act altruistically and help them in order to reduce their suffering. The other option is that we don't take on the other person's perspective. We don't put ourselves into that other person's shoes. The emotional response that we see from this person's suffering is that it's personally upsetting, right? So seeing a homeless person on the streets of New York, somebody might say, "Oh, that's really awful. I can't imagine, not having a place to live, or not knowing where I'm going to get food," or whatever the case may be. That's showing empathic concern. They were able to put themselves in that other person's shoes. Someone else, though, might still feel upset by seeing a homeless person, but it might not be for the same reason, right? They might not take on the other person's perspective. They might just say, "Oh, this is just really upsetting. I'm trying to have, a nice day or whatever, and here's this person who's asking for food. They're hungry. This is upsetting to me," right? They might be motivated to help this person, to give them food, but the motivation or the type of motive in this case would be egotistic, because they haven't taken on that other person's perspective. The end result by helping, say, this homeless person would be a reduction in their own personal distress. I saw someone who's homeless. This upset me. I gave them money. It made me feel better, right? Again, in the end, the person was helped, right? So how much do we want to focus on the motives there? Depends on how important the understanding this type of moral reasoning or this moral motivation is. I guess I just take a more practical approach when it comes to this, that are people being helped or not, and even if it's for egotistic reasons, okay, so long, I mean, that's better than them not being helped, right? But just my opinion, of course. Okay, so here's likely the solution, or really likely the answer, or what most helping involves is actually both of these things. That there's both an altruistic component and an egotistic component. I'm sorry, my voice is raw. I'm trying to soothe it here, but and a good example of this is that people tend to volunteer for multiple motives, and people tend to help for more than just one reason. Let's say, I was a crisis counselor for, well, technically I still am. I still do volunteer shifts. Most of it's online text crisis counseling now, but I used to do hotline crisis counseling, suicide hotlines, domestic violence hotlines, LGBT hotlines, rape everything, right? I did this, over 20 years now. And why did I start doing crisis counseling? Well, one is because I wanted to help people, right? But two, I wanted to get into graduate school. I wanted to become a psychologist. I thought it would be a very good experience. I thought it would look really good on an application for college, right? So does that make me a horrible person, or does it make me any less or my helping any less valuable because I did it for a line on my CV? Not completely for a line on my CV, but I certainly put it on my CV. I certainly talked about it in my applications, right? The fact that I still do it now, I'm a tenured professor. I'm not applying for any jobs anywhere or anything anytime soon or ever. So, I mean, I think it just goes to show what I was saying before. In the end, I ended up helping a lot of people, and yeah, there were definitely costs associated with it. I often did the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning, and you get some really difficult calls, and I had to take a break from it, because of burnout and what have you. But that's just my story. That's my example, right? They're pretty much ask anyone, why do you volunteer there? They're likely to say, well, it's really rewarding, right? So what are you going to say to them? Hey, you selfish asshole. You get pleasure out of helping other people? How dare you? No, of course not, right? Yeah, helping is rewarding. I think that's a good trait that humans have. I think that's a good thing for us. So it's okay, right? And yeah, sometimes, it's a mixture of both. Of genuinely wanting to help others, but also wanting to help you too. Help yourself in there. We see that egotistic motives may produce longer active support than altruistic motives. So it might actually be better that you're doing the helping for more egotistic reasons. For example, let's say, the helping profession, take a social worker, a caseworker, right, for the county, completely underpaid and dealing with some really horrible stuff that they see. They're doing that. They went into that profession because of altruism, because they want to help other people. But maybe they're sticking around because for the paycheck. They need the money, right? Otherwise, like, how long would somebody actually really last in that position? Again, helping can be very costly, physically and mentally, psychologically. So sometimes egotistic motives actually lead to better, at least at longer active type of outcomes. Okay, when it comes to, say, other types of motivations of why people will tend to help others, here are a couple of different types of motivations that were identified in terms of why people helped other people who had HIV/AIDS. This comes from a study that was done in 1995. So part of, say, what makes up your motivations for helping can be values, right? The different values that you have. And these examples here are all related to helping individuals with HIV/AIDS, but they can be applied to helping any type of group of people, or being involved in any type of helping, any helping situation here. So again, values. So somebody might say, well, I help people with AIDS because of my humanitarian obligation to help others, or because I enjoy helping other people, or because I consider myself a loving and caring person, right? So these are the values that a person has. Also, for understanding, that maybe they would say, well, I volunteer to learn more about how to prevent AIDS, or to learn how to help people with AIDS, or to deal with my personal fears and anxieties when it comes to HIV/AIDS. Or maybe the motivation involves personal development. So to get to know people who are similar to myself, or to meet new people and to make new friends, to gain experiences dealing with difficult situations. Maybe there's a community concern. So people would say, I volunteer because of my sense of obligation to the gay community at that time, particularly, right? Because I consider myself an advocate of gay-related issues, or because of my concern and worry about the gay community, right? Or maybe there's some motivation for esteem enhancement. I help other people to feel better about myself, or I help people with AIDS to help escape other pressures and stress in my own life, essentially to distract me from my own problems, let's say. Or maybe to feel less lonely, right? Remember, the running theme in this class is humans need to belong, and this is a good way to feel connected to something is by being involved in helping, especially if it's on a community type of level, where a lot of this is coming from. Again, particularly in 1995, when HIV/AIDS was still very much like a gay, I won't say a gay issue. Of course, it wasn't there, but society very much saw it as that. So it was very hard to, well, even to this day, kind of to separate public health issues and political issues, if that makes sense, right? We're still kind of dealing with that now, even with pandemic stuff. It's a whole other realm of politics and public health. It kind of drives me nuts, because how do we politicize public health? People do it though, right? Okay, so we've been talking about, why people help, and all the different reasons as to why people help. Let's focus a bit now on why people don't help, when it seems almost unimaginable that they wouldn't. Well, there's something known as the bystander effect. And the bystander effect occurs when the presence of other people inhibits us from helping. And there's so many tragic stories of assault and rape and murder and violence that there were plenty of people there who could have intervened, who could have stopped it, who could have helped, and didn't, right? And I mean, the most famous one in social psychology, definitely in your textbook, is the Katie Genovese story. And just very briefly, a young woman living in Queens in the 1970s who had an incredibly abusive boyfriend that she broke up with, and she lived in an apartment complex. Dozens, if not hundreds, of people lived in this big complex, and he beat and murdered her, stabbed her to death, right in the courtyard. And dozens and dozens of people were watching, looking out their window, and nobody called the police, right? And if you're from New York City, not even Long Island, got tabloid papers, right? The Daily News, New York Post, all that stuff, ran all these stories about how horrible New Yorkers are and what a shit city this is. That everyone just sat by and watched as this young woman was stabbed to death, right? And of course, as with the same line of thinking that came with the Milgram experiment, the psychologists, social psychologists, there has to be something else going on here. And they interviewed some of the residents who saw what happened and didn't call the police, and most of them said, I was watching this happen and I couldn't believe no one was doing anything, right? And they said, well, what did you do, right? And they're like, well, I didn't do anything. I mean, I thought everyone else was doing something, right? So clearly there were some social psychological processes at work here. And even in the 1970s, no matter how bad New York City was at that time, it wasn't that bad. There was a better, more accurate explanation as to what was going on, and it was the bystander effect, right? So what is the bystander effect? Well, let's take a look in terms of the different steps, or the different stages that happen, or that need to happen in order for help to be provided. And we'll talk about each one of these in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. But first, there has to be some type of event, right? We'll call it an emergency here. So something happens. And what might prevent someone from not helping at this point? Well, they might not know something happened. They might be totally distracted. So they are not paying any attention, right? Also, at this point, there's an emergency, but they're distracted, not because, kids are making noise, or they're too busy reading a book, or they're getting phone calls or anything, but they might be distracted because they have their own issues going on. They have their own pressing emergency, right? Maybe they're late for a meeting, or maybe they just got horrible news about something that happened to someone in their family. Whatever the case may be, helping might not happen because nobody noticed. Nobody is noticing the emergency, right? So the first step in helping is you need to notice that something happens, right? Or that something is happening. So let's say we get past step one. There's an emergency and we notice it. Okay, so what can prevent us from helping at this point? Well, ambiguity can help us, or can prevent us from helping, right? There have been a couple of times when I taught class, I've been teaching like this subject even, social psychology, and you would hear, especially, when I taught down campus closer to the dorms, and you would hear somebody scream. They would say, "Stop it, get away from me," right? Well, you have to like pause. Okay, we all noticed something happened here, but we're down by the dorms. Is this just some people fooling around? Are they joking around? You kind of listen to see, like, are there any other cues? Are they going to scream again? I mean, luckily each time it was all accompanied by laughter and more horseplay. Like, so I knew it was just, some people living in the dorm fooling around, right? But it was an ambiguous situation. So maybe I was wrong some of those times, and I just chalked it up to college students having some fun messing around with each other. So ambiguous situations can prevent us from intervening or from helping. The relationship between the attacker and victim. This is a big one. And a lot of us would like to think that this was more of an issue, quote unquote, back in the day, but it still very much exists. People do not like to get involved in family altercations, family affairs, right? So when you see like a parent scolding a kid or even hitting a kid, there's this feeling about this is a family issue, this is a personal issue, like maybe we shouldn't get involved, right? Whereas if it were a stranger hitting someone else, well, this is my business, right? This isn't something personal. Like, I don't need to know if there's some hidden motive or some reason why. I mean, once there's a relationship between, say, the victim or an attacker, there tends to be this feeling for us to kind of pull back. Like, well, maybe we don't know the whole story, or maybe this is not for us to deal with, right? Another reason might be pluralistic ignorance, and that's part of what was going on in the examples that I gave, like a couple of times that I would hear, say a student outside who said, "Hey, stop it, get away from me." Other people in the classroom noticed too. Students in the classroom noticed too, and I would say, what's going on out there? They didn't know either, right? None of us knew. So people kind of just go about their business, right? Pluralistic ignorance, we can kind of think about this back to sheriff studies on informational conformity, right? So when we don't know the answer, or we don't know a piece of information, we tend to look to other people for answers. The problem is they don't know either, right? So we end up making the wrong decision, or in this case, we end up not helping. You might hear a loud bang outside, and maybe in your head you think, was that a gunshot that went off there? And you look around, and everyone else is kind of looking around too, and well, no one seems to be bothered, so we just go on about our business, and no help is provided, right? So the second step is that you need to interpret this event as an emergency. Not just notice that something happened, but now you have to interpret it as something not good is happening, right? So you have to overcome that ambiguity. You have to overcome whatever stuff you might think or preconceived notions about the relationship between the people that are involved. You have to overcome pluralistic ignorance and notice that, yep, this is an emergency, this is an event that needs some action. So what could happen in between that, after you notice that there's you interpret an event as being an emergency? Well, now you're faced with the diffusion of responsibility. And this is exactly what was going on with the Kitty Genovese situation. Everyone expected everyone else to do something, right? Everyone expected everyone else to call the police, to call for help. And they were shocked that they didn't. I can't believe no one did anything. Why didn't someone do something? Well, aren't you someone, right? Yeah, but everyone was there, right? You were there with them, right? So we have this notion of a diffusion of responsibility. And this occurs in larger groups, and it's related, again, back to our discussion on group processes here, and the diffusion of responsibility and depersonalization and anonymity, kind of getting lost in the crowd, so to speak. So in order to get to step 3, where you actually take responsibility for providing help, you have to overcome this diffusion of responsibility and say, how come all these people are doing nothing? Okay, I'm going to do something. I have to do something, right? So that would be the third step. So number 1, there's some event happening. Not even before step 1, right? Some event happens. Step 1 is noticing that this event happened. Step 2 is interpreting that event as an emergency or an event in which an intervention needs to happen. Step 3 is personally taking responsibility for providing that help that needs to happen. And then to get to step 4, where you decide how to help, you have to overcome this feeling of lack of competence, right? Meaning, before you can decide how to help, you have to overcome your own feelings of, well, I'm not trained to do this. I don't know how to do it. Someone with more skills should do it, right? Or I have no idea where to even begin to help, so I won't. It's almost like a paralysis that you could get into. So you need to overcome that in order to reach step 4, where you decide how are you going to help. So now you've decided how you're going to help. Final step is to actually help. Well, there's some barriers there too, right? One is audience inhibition. So remember this whole idea of social facilitation. How having other people around us can alter our performance, especially if this is not an area that you particularly feel competent in or that you're particularly good at. You might feel this social pressure of looking stupid or looking incompetent or not knowing, like appearing that you don't know what you're doing. So essentially, you need to overcome this audience inhibition. Also, this is the time, once you decide how you're going to help, this is the time when you might start doing a cost-benefit analysis. And you start weighing the options. Is there more costs to helping in this situation than there are benefits? So once you're able to get through all of these stages, look at all of these stages, and look at all of these issues that can pop up in between these stages to stop you from helping, and you finally get there, you're so close deciding, you know now how I'm going to decide to help. Now I have to get over all these people looking at me, like saying, why aren't you doing something? Yeah, you're not doing it right, or whatever it is, right? I gotta overcome that. Now I have to do this cost-benefit analysis of whether this is even worth it for me, whether I should even be doing this. So it's actually a lot of steps involved here, and a lot of social and psychological processes that come into play. So helping is not always an easy task, right? So just to summarize these different steps, of course, the first step there is noticing that someone needs help, right? And the presence of other people can often divert attention from us noticing that there's a problem. Why? Because other people are distracting. Maybe a bunch of stuff going on, especially, say, me as a teacher, professor, like teaching a class, and I'm trying to do my thing, and if there's some students talking in the background, and I might be even less likely to notice that something's going on. So you have to kind of overcome the stimulus overload. The next step, once we notice that something is happening, we have to interpret it as an event that needs some type of intervention. And the more ambiguous a situation is, the less likely bystanders are going to intervene. So, again, especially when I would teach it down in human ecology or whatever building closer to the dorms. I taught a class in Lee Hall once, right? So you'd hear, students being students and having fun. And some of that stuff is kind of ambiguous. Are they screaming because they're horsing around, or does somebody need help? It wasn't always clear, right? So there's that ambiguity you have to overcome, and then there's pluralistic ignorance. You don't know what's happening, so you look to other people. They don't know what's happening either. So everyone kind of thinks, well, I guess nothing's happening, right? Because no one else seems to be concerned. No one else seems to be worried, so I won't be worried, right? Next step, once you interpret it, something as needing an intervention, well, now you have the task of taking responsibility for making it happen. So you need to overcome diffusion of responsibility. And this is the belief that others will or should take responsibility for providing the assistance. That's great. If everyone thinks that someone else should do it, then no one's going to do it. So you have to be the person to say, I'm going to do it. Okay, that's tough. But let's say you made it that far. Well, now you have to decide. So you decided that you're going to help, and now you have to actually provide the help. And a big part of that is overcoming audience inhibition, right? And as we said before, audience inhibition can involve the reluctance to help for fear of making a bad impression on other people, or reluctance to break from perceived norms that promote you to mind your own business, right? It's a big part of our culture is to, mind your own business. Don't get involved. You have to overcome that in order to actually provide the help that you want, or that you want to give, or that you've decided to give, right? A big part of this too, not mentioned here, is making sure that cost-benefit analysis you're doing in your head here comes out in favor of the person who needs your help, right? That it would be more beneficial to help in this situation than it would be costly. Okay, so how can we avoid the bystander effect? Well, if you're in need of help, there are a couple of things that you can do to help the bystander effect be reduced or even reversed. So the bystander effect tends to go away or be reduced when the bystanders know or feel connected to one another, right? So, if any of you lived in a big apartment complex in Queens, I lived in a big one in Brooklyn. I was there for 8 years. I didn't know a single neighbor's name. It's just the nature of living in a big city sometimes, right? But the bystander effect can be reduced if all the neighbors knew each other's names, and felt, a personal connection. They might feel more of an obligation to help out, right? It's also the bystander effect can be reduced or reversed when effective helping would require multiple helpers. So, in other words, when there's a situation that requires more than one person to help, then we often see that the bystander effect is reduced. Why? Because everyone knows not just a single person can help in this situation. We need multiple people. So it can't just be someone else's responsibility. They can't do it by themselves, so that kind of by default puts some pressure on you to get involved as well. And also, if people would feel that they would be scorned for failing to help, meaning that there are going to be consequences, repercussions, if you don't help, right? And this is your responsibility to help, or what kind of person are you to let this happen, so on and so forth, whatever the case may be. People feel that there's going to be some stigma attached to them not helping. Remember, humans care a lot what others think about us, so we certainly don't want to be seen in a negative light when it comes to not helping someone in need, right? So a person in a leadership role or who is in a helping occupation is more likely to help for potentially a couple of reasons. Some we already discussed. Maybe people who are in a leadership role, or certainly people who go into helping occupations, might have more of an altruistic orientation, than others. But there might also be increased social pressure as well, right? That, what? You're a nurse and you didn't help? What? You're a teacher and you didn't help? You're a doctor and you didn't do anything? You see? Some social stigma stuff might be going on there as well. So if you are in need of help, what can you do to increase the likelihood that you would get help in a crowd? Well, you need to, number one, counteract the ambiguity of the situation by making it very clear that you need help, right? So even just screaming out, "Stop it," right? That could be ambiguous sometimes. Screaming out, "Help me," is less ambiguous. But if you said, "Help me, I'm being attacked," or "Help me, X, Y, and Z," whatever the case may be, just to do whatever you can to make sure there's no ambiguity here that you need people's help, right? And that's not victim blaming at all, right? It's you understanding that humans, by our nature, we don't do good with ambiguity, and we tend to kind of brush things off, make it impossible for people to say, well, I didn't know what was happening. Bullshit. I said right up front, I need help. This is what's happening to me, right? And not, oh, bullshit, because you can assume or anything. In their minds, like, don't let them in their minds say, well, I don't really know if this person needs help. Nope. I literally said what's happening, and then I need your help, right? So how do you, let's say you overcome that ambiguity. Now they know that you need help. How do you get them to help you? How do you get them to overcome this diffusion of responsibility? Well, you gotta single them out. You gotta find one person out of that whole crowd. Maybe there's 10 people there who are all standing around and doing nothing. You need to point to one person. You need to make eye contact with them, point at them, and you need to say, you in that blue shirt, help me, please, right? There's no diffusion responsibility now. You pointed to that person, you called them out, right? You made eye contact with them, and you described them physically. So now they don't help. Now because you put all the blame, or not blame, responsibility onto one individual. If that person doesn't help, then the other people in the group might start turning on them, right? So you diffuse the responsibility, or you de-diffuse. De-diffuse. I don't know what I'm talking about at this point. You totally got rid of the diffusion of responsibility. You put the responsibility all onto one single person. So now there's a bunch of social pressure from all those people who were ignoring you now. Now they're saying, hey, you dude in that blue shirt, why aren't you helping that person, right? Okay. No one says any of this is fair. This is how you overcome, these social psychological issues that we run into, and how you get help when you need it. You need direct requests to very specific people, right? Okay, so what about our environment, or say certain situations in which helping is more or less likely to happen? One thing that we know for sure is that mood is associated with helping, but in a bit of a complicated way. Good moods tend to almost always lead to helping behavior. Not always, we'll see in a moment. But typically when you're in a good mood, you're more likely to help. Bad moods, it depends why you're in a bad mood, right? But one situational factor that's not associated with mood that has been shown over and over again to affect helping is time pressure. So when we are pressed for time, when we really don't have time, we're kind of busy, whatever the case may be, number one, we might fail to notice that someone needs help, right? Because we're not paying attention. We're pressed for time. Also because we have our own things to do, we're pressed for time, our own obligations, we might be less likely to accept responsibility for being the one to help. Also, when we're pressed for time, we have things to do, we might decide that, yeah, the cost of me missing this job interview, or me missing the birth of my kid or something, is not worth it. It's not worth it for me to stop and help this person, right? So there are lots of reasons why time pressures can conflict, even with our good intentions, even when we want to help. pressures of time might prevent us from doing so. When it comes to moods, we talked about good moods and bad moods, but there's even sensory conditions, such as the weather. Sunny days, right? Sunny, pleasant weather, we tend to be more helpful. Ambient scents, so, smelling flowers or smelling fresh apple pie or fresh baked cookies, we're more likely to help in situations where there are neutral scents or when there are unpleasant scents. All of these things can affect our willingness to help other people. When it comes to feeling good, when does feeling good, why does feeling good lead to doing good? Why does feeling good lead to helping behavior? Well, there's often this desire to maintain our good mood, right? So when we're in a good mood, we tend to be motivated to stay in a good mood, and helping other people tends to make us feel good. So being in a good mood can lead us to help in order to stay in a good mood. Also, when we're in a good mood, we tend to have positive thoughts and positive expectations. So we're in a good mood, we're thinking, the best of people, we're expecting some good outcomes, and this might motivate us to help as well, right? When feeling good might not lead us to helping. Well, if the costs of helping are too high. So if I'm in a really good mood, but if I stop and help this person, this might really put me in a bad mood. Well, now the cost of helping is kind of high, right? Because it's going to be at the expense of me feeling good. So I might avoid that situation, or not notice it, quote unquote, not notice that someone needs my help, because I'm motivated to stay in a good mood, and that's totally going to kill my buzz, right? That's going to totally kill my good mood in that sense. Also, when we're in a good mood, that we might have positive thoughts about other social activities that kind of conflict with our helping. That is, if our good mood makes us want to go out and party with our friends, our motivation to engage in this type of social activity might prevent us from stopping to help someone in need, right? Because, well, it's my brother's wedding or whatever, or I haven't seen my friends in so long. I really want to make sure I'm there, right? I don't want to miss out on that by stopping and helping this person. So part of that, it says positive thoughts about other social activities. Embedded in that might be some issues of time pressure as well. Okay, so bad moods and helping. This is the research could be a little more complicated here. So negative feelings can promote pro-social behaviors, but there's a weaker correlation than found with good moods and helping. So what do we mean that negative feelings can promote pro-social behaviors? Well, we're more likely to help other people when we're in a bad mood if we take responsibility for our bad mood, right? In other words, if we feel guilty about something, then we're more likely to help. Also, if we focus on other people, right? If we feel bad because of the state of the world that we're in, the focus isn't on us. It's, wow, those people have it so bad. That makes me feel horrible, right? It's a reason why you're feeling badly is because of empathic concern, essentially, right? And if we think about our personal values that promote helping, right? So, this example, I really shouldn't act like such a jerk next time. I have to be nicer. So if you kind of maybe a little introspective, like, why do I keep doing that? Why do I keep acting this way? You start having these, say, thoughts about your own personal values that might lead you to engage in helping behaviors. So when would bad moods lead to not helping, or to ignoring people who are in need of help? Well, if we blame other people for our bad moods, right? If we don't take responsibility for our bad moods, and it's not that I feel guilty, that's not why I feel bad. I feel bad because I hate people, right? Because people are jerks. People, make me do these things. So if we don't take responsibility for how we're feeling, and instead blame others for how we're feeling, we would be less likely to help. Also, when we become very self-focused, so if we're focusing more on our depression, or our anxiety, or our sinus infection, we might be less likely to help people because, I got it bad. I need help myself, right? So the focus is turned inwards instead of, say turned outwards. Also, if we think about our personal values that don't promote helping. So an example might be, I have to wise up and start thinking about my own needs more. Stop worrying about other people all the time. I need to be happy. I need to worry about me, right? Those personal values kind of conflict with the idea of helping others. Not always, right? But they can, right? In terms of role models and social influencing, or social influence, observing role models increases the modeled behaviors in others. In other words, when we see people acting in kind or charitable or helpful ways, and these are people who we respect, these can play an important role on our value, or the value we give to helping behavior, right? So parents are particularly important role models. So if you want to raise kids who are helpful, kind children, then you should model that type of behavior, right? But there are other role models, of course, peers, teachers, people in the media, so on and so forth. But role models engaging in pro-social behavior tends to have a strong influence on the people seeing this type of behavior. When we talk about social influence, we spent a whole chapter on social influence when it comes to conformity and obedience and compliance. Charities and fundraisers will often use social influence, say, role models and other types of social influence, including compliance techniques, as ways to motivate people to donate or to volunteer or to help. When it comes to the notion of what's known as reluctant altruism, altruistic kinds of this refers to altruistic kinds of behaviors that result from pressure from peers or other sources of direct social influence. So reluctant altruism, I don't know, kind of be thought of as a little bit of a coercion, I guess, right? This kind of feeling pressured into donating to a charity, or donating or your time, or volunteering somewhere because you feel pressured to do so. South Park had a great episode about this. involving Whole Foods at the checkout line asking, people if they wanted to donate to help feed hungry children, right? Like you just spent $100 on avocado toast or whatever the hell it was. Would you like donate money to feed hungry? Okay, I guess. I mean, you say no, right? It's difficult to do. That's a lot of pressure there. That's reluctant altruism. I don't know how I feel about that. Feels a little coercive, right? But I don't know. Life coercive. It's all that. So some personal influences is that some people just tend to be more helpful than others, and we kind of think of that as a altruistic personality, right? That some people might just feel, more of an obligation, more of a personal obligation to help others. There is some evidence that there might be that heredity might play some role or be a component in helpfulness. So there might be some genetic type of influence when it comes to helping behavior or not. And again, whenever we have to say there may be, then it means the jury's still out, right? There's no definitive evidence. But there's some evidence to suggest that this could be a role. People who tend to be more helpful are more likely to be more agreeable on the Big Five personality measures. They tend to be more humble, so less braggadocious, more humble people, more agreeable, easygoing type of people. They tend to exhibit internalized and advanced levels of moral reasoning, especially when it comes to other people's needs. So they don't tend to think in terms of black and white when it comes to morality. It's like, well, things could get complicated, right? There might be areas of gray in there. They tend to, no surprise, right, behave more altruistically than others. It's kind of a silly bullet point there. People who tend to be more altruistic tend to behave more altruistic. I think I need to change that. And they're more likely to show empathic concern for others. That's important, right? So remember, helping, you don't need to show empathic concern to help others. You can help others to reduce your own personal distress. But empathy tends to be, a major driving component of altruism. Let's just take a look here at interpersonal influences. So, are some people more likely to receive help than others? Well, not surprisingly, we discussed this in the last chapter, right? The beauty advantage there. People are more likely to offer help and cooperative, and be cooperative and offer help and cooperation to others who are more physically attractive. So, yeah, if you want people to help you, it's good to be physically attractive. Luckily, it's also helpful to be interpersonally attractive. So not only are we more likely to offer assistance to those who we perceive as being more physically attractive, but also people who we like more, right? People who are more interpersonally attractive. Also, we're more likely to help others who we perceive as not being responsible for the situation that they're in. So, more likely to help someone with, say, lung cancer who's never smoked a cigarette in their life than you are to help someone with lung cancer who smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day for 40, 50 years, right? So we're more likely to help people who we view as not being blameworthy or not being responsible for the situation that they're in. People are usually more helpful to those that they care about. So people who we know, not just kin selection, but our friends or people who we like. Also people who are similar to us, so we're more likely to help people who we have things in common with, or we're more likely to help people who belong to our in-groups. When it comes to gender and helping, the research isn't that great. We don't see huge gender differences here. But there's some evidence that suggests that men are more likely to help in more dramatic ways when they feel in competition with other men. So kind of that knight in shining armor type of effect, right? So if they feel kind of in competition with other men, they might be more heroic like in their helping, and men are less likely than women to seek help, even though there's some recent research to suggest that this is not true, at least when it comes to mental health. Some interesting when I say recent research, I mean like I literally just read this publication that came out two weeks ago or so. Number one, the research suggests that men are much more likely, almost twice as likely, to have cried within the past month of this study of that survey than women were, and about 16% of men of this massive survey reported seeking out help for mental health issues, compared to only 40% of women. So I don't know, the tide might be changing a little bit in this regard. Probably when it comes to physical stuff, maybe because of gender role beliefs, we're all kind of taught we're supposed to act in certain ways. Maybe men would still be less likely to seek out help for that, but at least when it comes to mental health issues, and it was not just that one study. I read like 2 or 3 studies that I thought were very interesting and kind of contradicted our current understanding, even though, like I said, these gender differences don't seem to be as important as other issues to begin with. But regardless, the research suggests that women are still more likely to provide social support than men are, even though there's some evidence that that's changing too. Like, men were starting to understand the importance of mental health and talking, because our life expectancy keeps plummeting, right? So probably, hey, if we want to live as long as these women are, then maybe we should talk about shit. Coming around slowly. Interesting studies that I saw. I'm not convinced yet, but they were certainly interesting. Okay, so when we talked about culture and who receives help, compared to individualistic cultures, collectivist cultures may be more likely to help in-group members, but less likely to help out-group members, right? So when again, think in terms of the United States or Western, Western cultures, Western European cultures, as being more individualistic, compared to say more Eastern cultures as being more collectivist. In collectivist cultures, your identity is more entwined with your in-group, your sense of belonging, your sense of self, but also your sense of social commitment or social obligation is more towards the group. In individualistic cultures, there's less of that. Still, part of our culture, the family and the in-group, but collectivist cultures might feel a greater emphasis to help in-group members, but be less likely to help out-group members than, say, individualistic culture. So we always tend to see this kind of back and forth, which means there's no real culture is kind of relative, right? There's really no such thing as a good culture or bad culture. Some are, do some better things in this department, and others do better things in that department. Things kind of counterbalance in a sense, because ultimately we're all just human, and we all kind of fall for these same, or all have these same flaws, or fall into these same social paradigms that we've been talking about all semesters in there. But cultures will vary in their endorsement of certain norms that are related to helping, right? So again, the norm of reciprocity. Some cultures might feel more of a sense of reciprocity, that, well, you did something for me, I must return the favor. I have to do something for you, right? Other cultures might say, hey, thanks for doing that. I'll catch you next time, or I'll help someone else do it. Also, though, when we take a look at the way that cultures differ in terms of things like equity, there are certain cultures who, value equity more than others, and equity is not the same as equality, right? We established that in the last chapter. Equity is more about fairness. What's fair, right? The United States, our culture is very big on equality, and equality is good too, but equality is not always fair, right? So equity, equality, not necessarily the same thing. Social responsibility, some cultures, again, kind of depends, right? Because collectivist cultures might feel a strong sense of social responsibility for members within their own in-groups, but not for members who are not in their in-group. So, again, these things are kind of difficult to pinpoint or to pin down, so to speak. And norms like justice. The United States tends to put forward or endorse this norm of justice, which of course is a good thing, right? Except sometimes to a fault, that like vigilante justice is not good, and no, we have laws that prevent vigilante justice, so clearly it's not a norm. But there are certain parts of our country, particularly the South, where this sense of justice is very strong, that it actually can move into this into a form of, say, vigilante justice. And I'm mentioning this because we'll be talking about it in our next chapter when it comes to antisocial behaviors. This chapter is pro-social behavior and helping. The next chapter deals with aggression, and there is a strong old school type of how should I how should I put it, honor code that still kind of exists in the South. You know, we don't have honor killings or anything anymore. Well, sometimes you do, but it's rare. But there's still this, you know, you just don't insult another person. That's grounds for people used to have duels over this stuff, right? So there's still parts of our country that, you know, different cultural pockets where these norms might differ. In the end, to wrap it all up, helping requires the recognition of individual human beings with whom we have a meaningful connection. So there's this quote from John Donne that says, "No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If the cloud be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if promontory were, as well as the manner of thy friends or thine own were. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls for thee," right? Yeah, ultimately, helping requires an understanding that we're all connected in some way, right? Not some way, but in a meaningful way. And we talked about the social psychological research that exists out there in terms of when we are more or less likely to give or receive help, and how we can try to establish these types of meaningful connections in other people when we need help ourselves. So until next time, don't be an island unto yourself. Okay? I'll see you then.